Hi, welcome to After Hours. My name is Walchuk. My guest today is Scott Clark. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So Scott, you're a longtime activist in the downtown east side. Currently you're the executive director of Alive. Can you tell me something about Alive?
Aboriginal Life in Vancouver Enhanced Alive Society. We were created about three and a half years ago. A number of us came together and we wanted to, there was a vacuum out there in Vancouver. And so we saw this vacuum around Aboriginal people, and we thought, let's come together and let's create this organization. And what makes Alive unique, unlike any other urban Aboriginal organization in Canada, from our understanding, is that we're the only organization really pushing for systemic change on how society views urban Aboriginal people and trying to create our place throughout all communities in Vancouver, not just the downtown east side, but all 24 neighborhoods. Enough of us being clients, enough of us being segregated off into some program or service over here. We're saying, no, those days are over. It's time that we embrace Indigenous urban Aboriginal peoples throughout all sectors of society. We're not talking about simulation. We're talking about taking our place and ensuring that our interests are represented. And the broader community are learning about Indigenous issues, so it's really about trying to build bridges and build inclusive communities.
So what kind of programs would Alive offer?
Well, the beauty about Alive is we don't get into programs ourselves per se, but we partner with other groups to do programs to encourage Aboriginal people to get engaged. So we're not tied, because one of our founding principles is that people don't grow up in programs, they grow up in communities, and so we've got to change that mindset. We'll work with other organizations to work with them to build programs that build empowerment principles around urban Aboriginal people and also build bridges between the various interests in a community.
What got you into activism?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that goes way back. I've had several roles, but ultimately when I saw what the Indian Act was doing to Indigenous people when I was fairly young, around our rights as officers of Aboriginal people. Before I knew it, I just got more and more engaged and pulled into issues. Actually, there was issues around voting rights, because there was a time when we as officers of Aboriginal people couldn't vote for our chief and council.
Isn't it something like Aboriginals didn't have the right to vote until like 1967 or something like that?
Yes, the Indian Act prevented us from voting, and actually a lot of our people, the details on that was like the 50s. They changed the Indian Act in the early 1950s, but some of us didn't get to vote until much later on. But what I'm talking about is our rights as officer status Indians. We were not allowed to vote for our chief and council. So the federal government set it up to discriminate against officers of Aboriginal people's mobility rights. In this particular case, around voting for chief and council, we took that right to the Supreme Court of Canada, and we won and got the amendment through what we call the Corbière decision. That's one very important victory for urban Aboriginal people or officer of Aboriginal people.
Sorry, what was that called?
The Corbière Supreme Court decision. Yeah.
Okay.
But what that really is speaking to is our rights, our mobility rights as Indigenous peoples on and off reserve, because what the federal government has done to all Indigenous peoples is they try to limit their responsibility to on-reserve Indians and lands reserved for Indians. And what we see is that, especially today, now, with all this stuff going on around I Don't Know More, Indigenous peoples on and off reserve are standing up and challenging the federal government on how it perpetuates its colonial divisive model on all of us, be us Métis, status, non-status, or Inuit peoples throughout all of Canada.
What is exactly happening with the status of Indian status now? I understand they're trying to get all under one banner.
Very recently, after 14 years in the courts, there's a fellow by the name of Harry Daniels, a Métis, who was also the president of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples back in '99. He launched a case challenging the federal government's Indian Act on their responsibility to non-status and Métis peoples throughout Canada. And only last week, we got a decision from the Federal Court of Canada stating that the federal government must honor and recognize all Métis and non-status peoples as Indians under Section 9124, which stipulates that they have a responsibility for Indians now being non-status and Métis, as well as land reserved for Indians. That's a huge decision. The implications of it, nobody knows yet. Will the federal government appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada? Likely. And what will be the outcome of that now that we've got 600,000 more Indigenous peoples that the federal government has to honor and respect? It's huge.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges facing Aboriginals in the downtown east side?
Well, the bigger issues around 9124 and how the federal government has offloaded us to the provinces, and now the provinces have offloaded us down to the cities.
Right.
The city doesn't have a strategy. They don't have an urban Aboriginal strategy. They have dialogues. They have circles. They put out forums. They don't have a strategy. And so here you have the largest number of Aboriginal people in the province of BC living right here in the Lower Mainland, and the largest number living in Vancouver. So when we look at the statistics around Aboriginal people in Vancouver, where 70% of our children are being pushed out of the school system here in the Vancouver School Board District.
Why are they being pushed out?
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
They're being streamlined into alternate schools. The graduation rate, like I said, is 30%. You've got 40% of the homeless youth population are Aboriginal. You've got 40% of the survival street sex workers that are Aboriginal. 50% of the missing and murdered women are Aboriginal. 60% of the children in care are Aboriginal, and on and on and on. So, the issues in the community are just, if it was anyone else, it would be a crisis. But for some reason, the federal government, the provincial government, and the city are, they're scratching their heads. They sort of like, it's this big elephant in the room. And ultimately, what Alive is saying is that you've tried a segregated service delivery model in the city. You've tried to corner us and push us all over to here. But you know what? Regardless of that, we still have those issues. So we need to find a new, more innovative, practical way to address these issues. So what are the issues? I just shared a lot of them with you. There's a lot more. But what we're simply saying to all levels of government, to our chiefs and to the Aboriginal service providers, the Parks Board, the School Board, the non-Aboriginal service providers is, listen, we're all in this together, and we've all got to figure out a way to work together beyond the old school model and find solutions. Start creating those opportunities, creating those spaces, educating the non-Aboriginal community about the issues around colonialism and its reality today in the ground, because we can't do this on our own. We need the broader community informed and engaged so that they can get on stream with supporting all vulnerable populations in Vancouver.
Now, you hear a lot about I Don't Know More. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the I Don't Know More movement was actually created by 4 women in Saskatchewan, and they were really upset with how Harper and the Conservatives are coming out with the 2 omnibus bills and a whole bunch of other bills that they're looking at passing. And what these were all lawyers. I think it was 1 non-Aboriginal, 3 Aboriginal women. What they did is some teach-ins in Saskatchewan. And what happened was it just took off nationwide. So now you've got particularly the young people and the women that are just organizing and having all these flash mobs and demonstrations, blockades, and all these things saying enough is enough. It's a non-hierarchical thing. It's a movement, and nobody knows where it's going, but it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's getting attention in the United States, Central, South America, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and it's just broadening out. It's really about the ongoing colonization that's going on in today's times, and time for the Western liberal states to stand up and look at the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights and implement it. Don't just say you adopt it. It's time to implement it. And people across the world are saying colonialism is a nasty enterprise that's being challenged now. So it's interesting. I don't know where it's going to go, but we're organizing with it as well.
So who are the key people in that?
Well, It's organic, so there aren't any key besides those 4 women in Saskatchewan, the lawyers. But there is no ownership on Idle No More. It's just whoever wants to do what they want to do as it relates to getting the federal government to honor Indigenous peoples. Here in Vancouver, it was the Native Education college students that took the onus upon themselves to start organizing events, and they haven't stopped. I mean, there must be, I can't even count now, there must be at least 10, if not 20 events that have already happened. And from the looks of it, there's going to be a lot more there's going to be a lot more anyways, but depending on how Harper is going to work around these bills he's unilaterally pushing through. I mean, those bills are damaging, extremely damaging to the treaty relationship of our people, as well as the constitutional relationship we have with Canada. So I don't see Idle No More slowing down. I see it getting much bigger, especially as we get out there, and many others are getting out there, start informing Canadians that, you know, we're in this together, and you need to get informed and get involved and hold our governments to account.
What would you like to see in terms of self-governance?
Oh, good question. Very good question. There's a Dr. Tayaki, he's a Mohawk, he's the Dean of UVic, Indigenous Studies Governance Program. I was just watching one of his videos last night. And he was talking about the evolution of the movement of Indigenous peoples in Canada, and, you know, all the 69 White Paper, the Buffalo Jump, the Ganazaki. These are all major movements of conflict between the state and Indigenous peoples, and about the state always trying to assimilate us as Indigenous peoples. And then the repatriation of the Constitution in 1982, where they implemented the Section 35 and 35(1), which talks about our rights as Indigenous peoples to be consulted and engaged to develop self-government. So that box, as Tayaki would say, was there. It's open Section 35 of the Constitution. If you haven't read the Constitution, and I would suggest many of us haven't for some time, if ever read it, the Section 35 and 35.1 are the key issues there. What does self-government, self-governance, or self-determination mean for Indigenous peoples? Now that's the struggle, and the treaty negotiations, the urban, the Métis, all this, it's a very complex issue. But
what does it mean for you?
Well, for me, it starts with self. It starts with me, right? That's where it starts. And it starts with my children, and it starts with my community. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. It's about, number one, you know, recognizing that I spend a lifetime, even to this moment that I sit here and talk to you, always checking myself, always checking for how I need to decolonize myself and be who I am, where I am as an Indigenous post-Irish person. Hard exercise. But my non-Aboriginal friends should be doing the same thing. What does it mean as a non-Indigenous settler to decolonize my mind? Now that's something that's very personal, and you have to tackle it yourself. But so self-government for me starts with myself. And it's about recognizing the environment that I live in and trying to create meaningful choices and decisions that are going to not only help me, but help my family and help my community. So that's where it starts with me. But on the much bigger, broader issues, the legal issues between Canada, the First Nations, the urban, the Métis, I mean, 1982 when we got the Constitution repatriated, and here we are in 2013, and where are we? It's a gradual process. It's about transferring power. It's about transferring resources. It's about relearning our languages, it's our culture. It's about building partnerships. And so it's really a pragmatic process. And one of the criticisms that Tayaki had in the video I was watching last night, it's not just about a transformation of the institution from the colonial state to the Indigenous state. It's about bringing in the cultural aspects. Right. Because now we've set ourselves up where, in the urban context, where we actually have Indigenous or Aboriginal organizations that are just the same as the state. And so we need to decolonize, and this is one of the things that Alive is saying, is we need to decolonize how both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal service delivery is currently working.